Good evening and welcome to the Four Lakes Church of Christ in Madison, Wisconsin. We're glad to have you with us tonight for our Wednesday evening Bible study. Tonight we're continuing in our new study of the book of Joshua. So we want to invite you to be finding a Bible and joining us in Joshua chapter 5 in just a moment. It is a short chapter, so this will be a shorter class than normal. But Joshua chapter 5, we'll be there in just a minute. But as always, if you have any questions about class, if there's something we need to know about as a church, if there's a prayer request we could honor, we would love to hear from you. You can send a message to me at info@fourlakeschurch.org. You could also call or send a text to 608-224-0274. As I said, tonight we're getting back to our study of Joshua. A major theme in this book comes in God's message to Joshua 3 times in chapter 1, be strong and courageous. As Joshua takes on a new leadership role, Joshua has sent messengers to spy out the land. They've come back with a very good report after having been sheltered by a prostitute named Rahab. They've now crossed over the Jordan River on dry ground. They are camped out at Gilgal on the west side of the Jordan between Jericho and the Jordan River. So that brings us up to speed. That's what we covered over the past several weeks. And so let's jump right into it tonight by looking at Joshua chapter 5. And the first paragraph is verses 1 through 9. So Joshua chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. Now it came about when all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard how the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the sons of Israel until they had crossed, that their hearts melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the sons of Israel. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, make for yourself flint knives, and circumcise again the sons of Israel the second time. So Joshua made himself flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeath Harloth. This was the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt who were males, all the men of war, died in the wilderness along the way after they came out of Egypt. For all the people who came out were circumcised, but all the people who were born in the wilderness along the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the sons of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness until all the nation, that is, the men of war who came out of Egypt, perished, because they did not listen to the voice of the Lord, to whom the Lord had sworn that he would not let them see the land which the Lord had sworn to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Their children whom he raised up in their place Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised because they had not circumcised them along the way. Now when they had finished circumcising all the nation, they remained in their places in the camp until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So the name of that place is called Gilgal to this day. Well, let's remember going into this paragraph that the Jordan River has been a kind of natural barrier or boundary for the people living in Jericho. But now, of course, though, they have 2 to 3 million camped out between them and the Jordan River. In fact, they walked across the river as if it wasn't even there. They crossed over on dry ground just a short time before this. And so let's notice then what effect this has on the locals. And going back up to verse 1, we find that all of the Canaanites and the Amorites are terrified. So their hearts melted, and there's no spirit in them any longer because of the Israelites. And in their view, this is basically already over. There's nothing more that they can do. Well, this then brings us to one of the least logical things that any army might do before battle. And notice in verse 2, God commands that every male be circumcised. We remember, of course, the covenant of circumcision started back in Genesis. Back when God chose Abraham, God instituted circumcision as a sign of the covenant, a sign of the agreement that he was making with Abraham. And circumcision was to be this permanent daily reminder of the agreement between God and his people. Well, in the following verses, we have this explanation that those who were born over the past 40 years in the wilderness had never been circumcised. This is a completely new group. This is not something they did on a regular basis. And so they get it done. However, let's notice they don't even have knives. And so they have to start by making knives out of flint. So step one, make knives. And so not only do they not have scalpels or any of that, but they have to make their own knives out of flint. But they go ahead, they get this done. And again, just from a military point of view, would it make sense to circumcise every single male out of a group of 2 to 3 million people just days before the first battle in the history of the nation. Well, of course not, obviously, but this was not a military move. This was an act of faith. This was an act of obedience to God. This was a sign of the covenant reminding them that God had made some promises, and now they're holding up their end of it. Well, according to verse 8, they stayed there until they've healed. In verse 9, we have the reason for doing this. This is a sign that God had rolled away or removed the reproach of Egypt from his people. They were making a symbolic break from the past at this point, breaking away from the disobedience and breaking away from the lack of faith that caused them to wander 40 years in the wilderness in the first place. And before we move on from this, let's just note here that under the new covenant, circumcision means nothing. It's not required, it's not recommended, it's completely in the realm of opinion. There is no spiritual benefit to this under the gospel. Of course, some of the Jewish Christians were trying to force it on the new Gentile converts, but they were distorting the Christian faith by trying to require something that God never required under the new law. And so that, of course, was one of the big conflicts in the early church, this tension between the Jews and the Gentiles. So I just wanted to point that out here before we move on. So let's continue then with Joshua 5, verses 10, 11, and 12. Joshua 5, 10 through 12. While the sons of Israel camped at Gilgal, they observed the Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month on the desert plains of Jericho. On the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. The manna ceased on the day after they had eaten some of the produce of the land, so that the sons of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate some of the yield of the land of Canaan during that year. Well, in verse 10, we find that they are now camping at Gilgal, again, between Jericho and the Jordan River. This is a desert area. This is a wilderness. And while they're camped at Gilgal, they observe the Passover. And just by way of brief review, let's remember the Passover goes all the way back to the last of the 10 plagues, where God commands the people to kill a lamb and spread the blood over the doorpost of their home so that the angel of the Lord would pass over and not take the lives of their firstborn. And of course, those who did not obey this command, though, they would lose their firstborn, including the people of Egypt. So they were to eat unleavened bread at the first Passover, basically because it was fast. They didn't have time to let it rise. They didn't have time for the whole process of making bread. Bread is it's kind of a long, drawn-out process. So this was the first fast food in the Bible, the first takeout or to-go menu in the Bible. So they were to eat on the run back there early on in the book of Exodus. Well, as far as I can tell, this is only the third time where we read about the people actually celebrating the Passover. I'm not saying they only did it 3 times. This is just the third record of it. We have the first one in Exodus 12. We have the second record of one 1 year into the wilderness in Numbers chapter 9. They do it on that first anniversary. And now we have a record of this one, 39 years after. So beyond the Passover, let's also notice in verse 12, this is where the manna stops. Again, by way of review, remember God provided manna, this bread-like substance, every morning, except for the Sabbath day, all throughout their time in the wilderness. Well, now, though, we are told that they are eating the produce of the land of Canaan. So they are moving in. This is their home now. These are their fields. They own this land. And this is what God has promised. They are finally now self-sufficient. And I think we have a reminder here that God will not miraculously give people what they are capable of getting themselves. And so here we find the manna did not continue even one day past when it was no longer needed. God wasn't going to give them what they could get on their own. And so now they have to provide their own food. And of course, all food, we know this, comes from God, but now they have a land of their own. And God certainly expects them to get to work. They can no longer just step out of the tent every morning and scoop up what's on the grass outside. They have to actually do something here. They actually have to work for it. Okay, this is, as I said, a pretty short chapter, so this is it. This is the last paragraph, only 15 verses in chapter 5. So let's conclude tonight with a pretty strange account. This is unusual, a little bit mysterious. I think we'll come away with some questions that are pretty much unanswered, I think, after reading this last paragraph. So this is Joshua 5, And let's look at verses 13 through 15. Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. Now it came about when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked. And behold, a man was standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, Are you for us or for our adversaries? He said, No, rather, I indeed come now as a captain of the host of the Lord. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, What has my Lord to say to his servant? The captain of the Lord's host said to Joshua, Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. And that's it. That's all we know about this little paragraph here. I mean, there's no more about it. So first of all, let's notice how Joshua is by Jericho when this happens. So I think as the leader, I'm assuming Joshua was almost certainly scoping it out himself, walking around on his own. There's no indication that anybody is with him, so maybe he's there prayerfully considering this, maybe trying to anticipate what's about to happen. Maybe he's kind of making some mental notes, maybe some plans as to how they're going to do this. Remember, Joshua is a military leader and has been for many years under Moses. But as he's there by Jericho, kind of looking around, he sees this man standing there. And this man has a sword drawn in his hand. And I mean, that's kind of unusual. And Joshua wants to know, are you for us or are you for our adversaries? And I hope we notice this man doesn't really answer the question, does he? But he says, No, rather, I indeed come now as a captain of the host of the Lord. And I don't know about you, but it reminds me of the time when a man was questioning Abraham Lincoln at some point during the Civil War. And I'm just paraphrasing this. I can't remember the source on this, but the guy was kind of asking Lincoln, Aren't you worried whether God is on our side? And Lincoln apparently responded by saying, Sir, my concern is not whether God is on our side. My greatest concern is to be on God's side, for God is always right. And so I think in a similar way, the question is not really, is God on our side? The question should be, are we on God's side? And I think it may be a fine line there, but I think we understand why that's so important. We're not trying to get God on our side. We just want to be on his side. So wherever God is, that's where we want to be. And I think that's what's going on here. And so this man with the sword answers, and Joshua reacts by falling on his face to the ground and bowing before this man and asking, What has my Lord to say to his servant? In other words, what's your message to me? And so what do you have to say to me? And this man, this being replies, Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua at that point removes his sandals. So it's not a real message. It's not a be strong and courageous message. It's this land you're on right now is holy ground. And maybe he was saying this land is now your land, and maybe this is the Lord's land. This is the answer to the promise that God made many years ago. I think that would probably be the best answer here. But I do wish we had a little bit more information. But where have we seen something a little bit similar? Where have we seen this take off your shoes for your standing on holy ground statement? Well, I think hopefully we're thinking about Moses back at the burning bush in Exodus chapters 3 and 4. And in that case, Moses was actually interacting with God, wasn't he? At first it was the bush, then it was the voice from the bush, and then it really seems that he's interacting with the Lord himself. So there's like this progression through the account, and there is a similarity to this. And so to me then it seems fairly obvious that this being is more than a man. He may have appeared as a man. It may have looked to be a man from Joshua's perspective. But going into this a little bit further, it is clear that this is not just more than a man, but really more than just an angel as well. Notice he describes himself as a captain of the host of the Lord. And as I remember it, that word host is normally a word referring to an army. And obviously, captain is a military term, isn't it? And so it seems then that this being would perhaps be responsible for leading God's armies in the upcoming conquest of Jericho. Wayne Jackson has a very interesting article on this, and I may actually try to put a link in the description of tonight's class video. So if you're joining us on YouTube, go back to the description and read the article that's tagged there if I can remember to do this when we post class. But if you want a link emailed to you or texted to you, if you want a hard copy when you come to worship on Sunday, just let me know. Or you can just go to christiancourier.com and do a search for it. But the title is A Brief Study of the Angel of Jehovah, or the Angel of the Lord, the Angel of Yahweh. That's the word that's used there. But Brother Jackson makes the case that this being, this man that Joshua sees out here near Jericho, is actually a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus himself, that this is Jesus before Jesus came into this world as Jesus or Joshua. Remember, Jesus and Joshua are the same. So this is a guy named Joshua, perhaps, interacting with Joshua. So there's a little bit of logic, a little bit of looking back and forth and comparing passages here. So we're not going to spend too much time on this, but since class is a little bit shorter, Brother Jackson's article had a series of 8 bullet points with various appearances of the angel of the Lord. And the first one is that this messenger, this angel of the Lord, promises to multiply Hagar's seed. And then in interacting with this being, this messenger, this man, she confesses, "You are a God who sees." And so it starts out communicating with one being, but she's clearly under the impression that this is God that she's talking to there in Genesis 16. Secondly, there is the messenger who calls to Abraham saying, "By myself I have sworn, says Jehovah," or Yahweh, and that's in Genesis chapter 22. And so there is this man who calls out to Abraham, but this man identifies as God. This messenger says to Jacob, "I am the God of Bethel." That's in Genesis chapter 31. This man or being wrestles with Jacob at Peniel, and yet the Bible identifies this being as being God in Genesis 32, also Hosea chapter 12. The fifth appearance, he speaks to Moses at the burning bush. We've already alluded to that tonight. Ultimately referring to himself as Yahweh or God in Exodus chapter 2, Exodus chapter 3, verses 2 and following. This being attributes to himself the divine oath. So this messenger says, "I am the one who brought you out of Egypt." And obviously the one who brought them out of Egypt was Yahweh. So there is this mixing of the characters there. Number 7, there is this being who accepts worship and speaks as God here. In Joshua chapter 5, also we have a reference in Judges chapter 6 as well. And then the 8th bullet point there is just the reminder that ordinary angels refuse worship. And we just referred to that recently, maybe this last Lord's Day at Four Lakes in the sermon. Revelation 22, angels do not accept worship, but there are certain angels or messengers or spokespeople from God who do, and that's where we think this may be Jesus in his pre-incarnate form. Other Old Testament passages refer to this being as God, and the designation is never repudiated, never contradicted. Genesis 16, Genesis 22, Genesis 48, Judges 13, and also a few verses there in Zechariah chapter 3. So again, for more information, I just want to encourage you to look at the rest of Brother Jackson's material on this on your own. But this being who is there before Joshua is obviously more than a mere man. He does not have Joshua stand up. But in fact, he speaks to Joshua just as Yahweh spoke to Moses at the burning bush. And it's almost like an encouragement to Joshua. You know, Joshua lived most of his life knowing about God speaking to Moses at the burning bush, and now Joshua has his own experience very similar to that. Take off your shoes or your sandals, for this ground you're on is holy ground. Concerning the purpose of this appearance, it is rather unusual. It's a bit mysterious, but again, it seems to me that it is in some way intended to encourage Joshua. I think that's safe to say. As he is there scoping out Jericho privately, as he is perhaps concerned about what's about to happen, this being appears and apparently comforts Joshua with his presence. There's no real message here other than the reminder that this being is the captain of the Lord's army. And I think that in itself would have been encouraging. Well, with this, we come to the end of Joshua 5. So, kind of looking over the whole chapter, I think we see the importance of obedience to God's commands. We see that with the circumcision of like 1.5 million people. The people trust that God knows best, and they obey, even though it absolutely doesn't make sense from a purely human or military point of view. And then we've got this appearance of this man before Joshua, who obviously is more than a man, and is encouraging Joshua in some way. So, Lord willing, next week we'll continue by looking at Joshua chapter 6 and the conquest of Jericho. Very exciting chapter. As always, thank you for being with us tonight. If there's something we can be praying about, let us know. And we appreciate your feedback. If you're joining us tonight in Appreciate class, we'd love to hear from you also. You can send an email to info@fourlakeschurch.org. You can also give me a call or send a text, 608-224-0274. As we close tonight, let's go to God in prayer. Our Father in heaven, tonight we're thankful for your word and for the encouragement that it brings to us. We're thankful for the encouragement that you gave to your servant Joshua. We understand from tonight's chapter that you want what's best for us. And so tonight, Father, we today, many hundreds, thousands of years later, we ask for greater faith, the faith to obey, even when we struggle to understand. Help us to be more like Joshua in that regard. Our Father, we come to you in the name of your Son, Jesus. Thank you so much for his sacrifice. In his name we pray. Amen.